Welcome everyone to this episode of Leaders with Purpose. I'm Rebecca Hull and I'm Managing Director here at Manifesto. Today we're joined by Louise Lane, who's Chief Marketing and Partnerships Officer at UNICEF UK.
And I'm Lou Lai, Chief Client and Transformation Officer at Manifesto. And in this episode, we explore topics like where does passion and purpose collide? How do you navigate and lead an organisation like UNICEF UK through transformation? And what could your personal growth story look like?
So welcome, Louise. Thank you for coming today. Super excited to have you on our podcast. We have Louise, we have Lou. My middle name is also Louise, so we're covered for the Louises. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself in a minute, what you do, what UNICEF UK does, but just suffice to say that super excited. UNICEF is an enduring client and partnership of Manifesto's. You yourself recently won a Beamer 100 for being a very brave client. So well done you. So thank you for coming and we really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So for those that don't know you, please just tell us who you are, what you do and a little bit about UNICEF.
Thanks for having me. As you guys know, I'm Louise. I'm the Chief Marketing and Partnerships Officer at UNICEF UK. That's a relatively recent change. So up until just a month or so ago, I was the Chief Marketing Officer, which I've done that role for about just over a year and a half. So I've worked at UNICEF a long time. And for those who aren't familiar, UNICEF is the world's leading organisation working for children and children's rights. And I'm part of the UK organisation.
Amazing. So when me and Rebecca decided to embark on a podcast, why not? You were one of the first people that sprung to my mind and always are on anything that I think about in the sector because you've been part of my personal and professional kind of leadership journey. And so I've had the privilege to kind of see you flourish over those many, many years. So could you just tell us a little bit about your story? What's been your journey to where you are now at UNICEF UK?
So probably started 18, 19 years ago. I was not totally fresh out of uni, but a couple of years in the sector, having done marketing degree at the same uni, but not at the same time, but not realizing and not knowing each other. And I worked for a commercial organisation and had a great time, actually. It was amazing, great place to cut my teeth in marketing. Really enjoyed it, but really felt kind of in my mid-20s, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to be part of change. And specifically around children's rights and humanitarian issues. And so I essentially was thinking, where do I want to work? And honestly, I wanted to work at UNICEF. That was the organisation that I felt was doing the biggest change in a way that I wanted to be part of. And so I would just sit on their website every week and wait for a job.
Wow.
And so I think a couple of months passed. I kept on looking to see if there's a job I could do. And finally, sort of like a marketing exec role, essentially, a direct marketing exec role came up and I applied for it and was lucky enough to be given it. I absolutely destroyed my first interview terribly, did a really, really bad job and scraped through to the next round, but then was lucky enough to be offered the job. And then, to be honest with you, it feels like it's a little like the rest is history. I feel like I've grown up at UNICEF. I've been really privileged to do like so many different roles. I've worked for both the global organisation and a kind of consultant strategy kind of sort of way. I've been in the marketing team, went on to lead the marketing team, worked in the strategy department, worked on Soccer Aid. I've been part of the humanitarian emergency surge capacity team, where if there was a large-scale emergency, a number of people would be deployed for a very short time. I've travelled many times with UNICEF doing multiple different roles, most recently last year in Ukraine and Sudan. And then went for this role, the CMO role last year, lucky enough to get it, be part of the executive team. And so I get the great job of leading the marketing, communications, partnerships, philanthropy, and Soccer Aid teams, as well as get to be the exec lead for humanitarian emergency response.
Wow. Okay. So no mean feat.
Yeah.
Very self-deprecating as always. 18 years is a long time to be in an organisation. Literally you did grow up there. So what's made you stick there for so long, other than all the amazing things that you've just said?
So this sounds awful, and I don't know how to say this without making it sound bad on UNICEF's behalf or even mine, is that I never meant to stay that long. It wasn't that I thought I wouldn't stay this long. It just was not something I really thought that much about. I joined in my mid-20s and I thought this was the most amazing organisation. I wanted to work there. But I guess as you unpick layers, if you do more different things, I didn't feel there was anywhere else I wanted to be. And UNICEF has been such a great support to me in terms of my development, giving me many opportunities, getting to see the work and the kind of impact we have firsthand. It just felt there was just no better place to be, in all honesty. So why leave?
One of the things that sort of really strikes me, well, there's so many things. It's almost as if you sort of, I love the fact that you sort of manifested this, like your job, you knew what you wanted, you went for it before manifestation was a thing. Do you feel that you've had something, would you describe it as a bit of a squiggly career in UNICEF UK, or was it always on an upward trajectory?
For sure, never always on an upward trajectory. I would definitely say I've been lucky enough to get really great progression. And I have obviously taken steps up in that time, but I've also done sideways moves for sure. Quite intentional to a certain extent as well, mostly because A, I thought I'd really enjoy it, or B, I thought it'd be really good development, and something to kind of get better at. I definitely made an intentional move to strategy out of marketing. Really felt like to be a great leader, you need to have really stretched and develop your strategic thinking skills, your critical thinking, your kind of how you develop kind of bigger picture work, and maybe make it, I guess, how it then essentially is actioned within an organization. So that was actually quite an intentional move. I also really enjoyed strategic work, and that side of things. So I don't think I've ever done a role I didn't think I would enjoy, but there were at times intentions. But I would also say I've done lots of sideways moves. I would say, working in the global organization was about kind of stretching my bandwidth and doing different things, moving into kind of trying the soccer aid role and doing that. That was completely different skill set, completely different way of working. But on paper, a sideways move, but was so good for my experience development, all those sorts of things, and has made me a stronger leader for it, for sure.
So you're a living, breathing example of something we talk about in another episode, where this sort of, kind of going broad can actually lead to a sense of acceleration and progression at some point, and about the evolving world of leadership. Modern leadership requires sort of versatility, exposure, like to new experiences, curiosity. And I think where you are today is sort of testament to having made some of those sideways moves. And it's a conversation that we have a lot about progression. Sometimes the best opportunity is left and right. It's not straight ahead of you, but we get so fixated on the next step, the next step, the next step.
And I really, that resonates with me, because I think I've been that person who wanted the next step up. Like, I felt it so keenly that I've probably cried in a one-to-one with my manager once. I was like, I feel like I'm ready for the next step up, and it just wasn't available to me, or for whatever reason wasn't the right time. And so I have a lot of empathy for those who are really keen for that upward progression. But I also can see, both in my career but also people around me, that if you get your foundations right, like if you get that kind of breadth of work, actually once you move up, your confidence is better, you're able to progress in that role quicker, you're able to make bigger impact. So I could not agree with more.
And I think that exposure to having put yourself into new environments where you don't know it, where it is a little bit more, I've got to get up to speed really quickly, it's actually like a muscle. And the more you do that, the more you're able to tap into that when you need it in the kind of harder sort of echelons of leadership.
I agree. And I think confidence as well. I think for me, one of the challenges of being in an organization so long is you're like, am I good? How would I do if I left the organization? Do people think I'm okay or good at my job because they've just known me for years, and we like each other and all those kind of things? So you worry that maybe you're not good in the real world, for want of a better phrase. And so actually doing different jobs and working with different people, whether internal or external, I think has been really great for my confidence, because I'm like, oh, okay, no, I can survive with other circumstances, other people. I'm not going to just fall into a puddle kind of thing.
And with that, look, I guess that's what I was thinking about when I think about your sheer commitment and loyalty to UNICEF's mission, and then your journey is how have you found that external insight? And I know you're really invested in your own like personal development and programs. What are the things that you kind of surround yourself in to kind of make sure that you're getting those other perspectives and also challenges to you?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it a lot, and we've been friends a long time, worked together a really long time. And I think that we talk a lot about kind of the people around you. And I think it's not just the people in your work, but the people who can influence your work. That now either sometimes you have like a mutual kind of space in which your work makes sense together, but sometimes there's people whose work is completely different. And that also really helps because actually they give a completely different perspective. So talk about village a lot. Like I'm really passionate about the people you surround yourself with who will both support you and like lift you up, but also challenge you when you're not necessarily going right. And you need to be around people who aren't the echo chamber either. Sometimes we need a critical friend, and the number of times I've called you and said, could you be in this meeting or could you come to this piece of work? I could do with a critical friend, an outsider's perspective. And I think it's we can live in echo chambers. You can just live within your organisation, and sometimes that's fine, but actually other times it's not. And I think it's just incredibly important to bring the outside in.
And so I guess one of the sort of drivers for this podcast was around sort of that sense of community. And when you think about the role and pressure for leaders now, actually sort of feeling quite isolated or alone. Yes, you might have an executive team, but you've got, the same kind of traits actually. Are there any sort of either networks or communities where you're sort of accessing, other leaders who are trying to sort of tackle some of the stuff that you're doing?
Yeah, I think so obviously I've been part for Mentored, which obviously is a great access, especially for women in the social impact space. I think I don't think I have necessarily formal spaces, if I'm being really honest. And I think that's not necessarily by design or anything like that. But I do think this is where people should think about their career and how they build the people around them. And I'm a firm believer that, you meet people along your way and along your journey, and, you bring them along with you. And I think, because you find like a like-mindedness or a challenge or something. And so if I look back at my career and I look back at the last sort of 20 years or so, and I think about the people I've stayed in touch with, they're not necessarily the ones I agree with the most or the people that we're most similar to, but actually you find something that when you work with them, there's something quite special and quite different. And so for me, I guess, in terms of other voices, I think the village is the only way to describe it. It's not a formal thing, but I think, equally, being curious as to what you read, making sure you don't have the echo chamber.
So I guess if we think about Soccer Aid and the journey you've been on, so you've got the sort of the juggle of, is this all right for me? Is this the right time? But then how did you actually manage that transition from actually a familiar territory to entertainment, sports, celebrities, which I feel, when you're sending me pictures with Tom Hiddleston, I'm like, this looks amazing.
So I think the transition, look, I think, and we've talked about this before, I think sometimes everyone's job feels a bit mysterious, and actually sometimes that works in people's favor, because actually if I make my role mysterious and there's a mystique to it, people will think that I'm brilliant at my job, or they won't try and do my job, or, they'll think I'm amazing. And I think when I took on the role, the people before me who ran that role are incredible women. Like there's no hesitation. They did an incredible job. But I think also what I realized is just so many common themes. It's about kind of relationships, about common goals. It's about kind of passion for what you're trying to achieve. It's about excellence. And I think, to be honest with you, and also shared values. And I think one of the things that, when you're working with very different industries, values don't always feel aligned necessarily. Sometimes you feel like awkward bedfellows. But that's also okay. And actually, it's not about changing each other. It's just about finding that commonality and common ground. So I think once I kind of relaxed into it, got to meet people, built relationships, you were able to then have very authentic conversations and honest conversations about when things weren't working. We once had a situation where, I won't divulge too much, but there was a celebrity involved and they needed to be removed from the campaign for various reasons. And then just having a conversation about why, UNICEF really strongly felt that they could no longer work on the campaign, even though they had been booked, announced, and all those sorts of things. And that was a tough one because I was worried about upsetting our partners. UNICEF also is not the final decision maker. We're a quad. We all are shared decision makers. So trying to influence to say why it's not right for UNICEF, but also why it's not right for the campaign. And also to be able to do that without, I guess, destroying the relationships, and I think we had built relationships so that when those conversations came, they weren't so tricksy. Actually, everyone was really supportive and understood, and ultimately, said, we understand and we accept the position, kind of thing.
And navigating that tension of shared values and purpose. And so, Rebecca, I know you're keen to dig in, particularly with Lou, around kind of actually where purpose and mission sort of collide with kind of profit. There are organisations who are part of that who actually, yes, they have values, but their business mission is to do something else. So it'd be, great to sort of unpack a bit of that purpose space.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you for sharing some of, sort of like your sort of genuine sort of authenticity around taking on some of those roles. When you said soccer aid and it's campaign based, I could feel this tiny kind of knot in my stomach, because I think anything that's got a fixed date and small children feels like a very precarious undertaking. So yeah, well done you for taking it on. Yes, I really wanted to unpack a few aspects of purpose with you, and I guess just to stay on that theme of sort of purpose and values, and what does it look like when it's sort of like living and breathing, or when it isn't? Because I think it's really easy to assume that in the not-for-profit sector or purpose-led organisations that everything kind of flows well, and everyone's sort of pulling in the same direction. But I think many of our listeners will agree it doesn't always feel like that. So I guess first question is, what does it feel like when it's working well? What does it feel like when sort of purpose and values align? And what's the sort of halo benefit of that?
I think what does it feel like is almost when it's not there. It's very easy to kind of not appreciate that it's there. And I was actually, this is such a bad example, but I was on Instagram doom scrolling the other day, and it was talking about take a moment to breathe through your nose and feel how good that is, because we rarely appreciate that and it's not until you've got a stuffy nose you're like, oh, I'd love to breathe through my nose. I know that's like the most inarticulate example, but I think when everything feels and everything is aligned, it just feels so natural and normal. You don't even consider it. It's only when you see the clash, I think, that you kind of take a moment and go, okay, it's not working. But I think, so I think if you were to really say, okay, what does it feel like? It feels like an extension of how you're working. It feels like you're working with like-minded individuals. You might not agree, but there's a core kind of value set that is aligned. You know that when you disagree, that you are able to kind of see through that. The disagreements become easier because actually you both all know that there's a kind of a common ground to be found. And it's just a lot nicer and a lot more fun. And I think that's something, it's so easy to take that for granted, I suppose, that actually, I want to enjoy my job. My career means a lot to me. I love my job. I love working for UNICEF, but I also want to enjoy it. And that's actually important too. So for me, when you're working where purpose and values and all are aligned, it feels good and it feels nice.
I spend a lot of time at work, so it's very reasonable to want to enjoy your work.
Should we unpack joy a little bit? Because it's one of our part of our manifesto, and that was a really important part of crafting that, Rebecca, around find space for joy. And I think, it's sometimes just doing great work that's impactful isn't enough if the way that you have to do it feels hard. Yeah. And of course there will be challenges, but what does joy mean to you actually, as I guess joy as a leader, and then how that sort of you take that out of the workplace?
I think joy is exactly that, is that you are, working with people that all are trying to push towards the same thing. I think it feels nice. You feel like, you're able to challenge, but people will challenge you. There's support there. I think it makes you want to be at work, because I think the opposite is, we've all had days where we don't want to go to work, or we've had a conflict and it's not felt quite right. And, it's been harder than it needed to be. So I think for me, the joy I find in work. So yesterday is a good example. I had a really joyful day yesterday. So I mentioned my job had changed recently. So we've merged two departments at UNICEF UK. So we now have what was previously the public engagement department, which was comms, marketing and soccer aid, which was my kind of previous remit. And we brought in philanthropy and partnerships. So we're now much like giving everyone PTSD, we're called PPE. I need to rename us. So we're public and partnerships engagement. And so, that change happened maybe just over a month ago, and where we've brought the teams formally together. And so yesterday I had a leadership day where it was my heads, directors, and me coming together for the first time to say, okay, this is who we are. And it was about 17, 18 of us in total. And the plan was in the morning, it was just with my directors, where we were setting the priorities for the next sort of 3 to 6 months, looking at kind of key focus areas for us. And then in the afternoon was getting the heads together to share their priorities, what they're up to, and also to start to collaborate on how they might be able to help each other through a kind of collective leadership approach. We then went and played mini golf for an hour afterwards. And I was reflecting on the day, and actually we were all kind of Teams messaging this morning saying it was just a really nice, joyful day. Actually, it felt very easy. It felt really nice to get to know people a bit better. It was nice to see other people connecting, and I think that was really lovely. And, it was nice to hear someone talking about X and then going, I would love to support that. I think I have an idea, and then them talk about it. And I think that was joyful because actually the purpose of the day was quite an easy, breezy day where just spend time together and start to build the connections, and then the rest will come. And I feel like that's what happened yesterday, is that the connections started to build. Everyone started to say, actually, I think I can help with that. And that was joyful. It was joyful to see people seeing how they can support each other.
I think that sort of really boils down to connection, isn't it? So, we maintain that, the challenges around transformation, all these big cycles of change that we go through, without sorting out the kind of human relationships, that position of trust, that position of safety, then nothing gels. But if you can make an environment or hold a space where connection can happen, something that we're just really naturally wired for. But I think that this modern day way of working, this modern way of living actually can be a barrier to connection sometimes. That is definitely sort of where it flows, and where we just get to be people united. There's something really interesting, like a phenomenon, I think it's called something like collective effervescence, and it's sort of a lifting of it's sort of actual sort of physical vibrations in people when you dance in formation or you dance together. So hence why gigs and clubs feel really good. And I think when work is good, you can have a feeling of that. Definitely we've had times in Manifesto where it has felt like an incredibly joyful place to be, and there's no reason why work has to feel hard all the time. Which sort of leads me on to a question which I think we have to accept, though, that sometimes it is hard. And I think being a leader in a purpose-led space comes definitely from my experience of working in the sector, my experience of working in other sectors. So having the opportunity to compare and contrast, I can do that being in financial services and the commercial sector. It's much harder to lead in purpose-led organisations. And I definitely have seen consultants come in to the not-for-profit sector and kind of thinking, well, this is just easy because it's all fluffy and we're doing good work, and actually being really struck by the complexity of the organisations. So there is, I really believe there's sort of paradox around being sort of purpose-led leader, where there's lots of trade-offs that you have to make. And I wonder whether you could explore some of that, I guess, from the position of someone, yourself 18 years ago, with all these sort of hopes and dreams for what the organisation can deliver, and then yourself 18 years on, where you're like, we can't do everything and we need to make trade-offs. What is your experience, and do you, from your vantage point, do you think that's changed and evolved?
That's a good question. I think trade-offs is such a good phrase, because I think, we talk a lot about kind of what's right for the business, and that sounds quite clinical, but it's not about the business itself. But if the business thrives, it means we're delivering the most for children. So when I talk about business, that's obviously what I mean as our core mission. But I think that's often quite a hard thing to say to people, because, ultimately people give so much in purpose-led organizations. They do take lower salaries. That's the reality. But they're doing it because they care. And so with that becomes their trade-off. There's, because they care, they want to work, they're willing to take a lower salary. That said, there also sometimes comes with a position of, so therefore maybe I have a greater say, or because I care so much, I should be consulted on this because I feel really passionate about that. And I have huge kind of empathy for that, because I've been there. I still am there. There are that's the reality. There are times when I make decisions that I don't love, but I know that they're the right thing because I have all the information, or I've been given all the information, or, it is often a trade-off. It's very rare do I get to have that win-win-win fundamentally. And so when you're in that leadership position, you also recognize that perhaps people don't have all the information because you can't share it, and or it's not, for them to worry about, for example, or, it's not appropriate. That's also like life in reality. So I think trade-off is an excellent word. I would say it always does often feel like a trade-off. And I think being a purpose-led leader is about kind of making sure you keep a kind of your colleagues and your teams, close to the mission. I think that's why they want to work, for UNICEF or whatever organization they do work for, because, that's why they're doing it. But not so close that actually it disrupts decision making to the point where it's not right for the business fundamentally. And that's a hard task, to be honest with you.
Yeah. And that's almost one of the biggest trade-offs, right? How much do you consult, collaborate versus actually, there simply isn't the time to bring everybody in to everything. We need to make some decisions, and often those decisions are difficult and can have individual or team consequences. So we're digging into some of this with other guests. How, when and I know that you will have had to make difficult decisions at some point, when you can see it on the horizon, what's your kind of personal process for kind of undertaking the fact that, okay, I'm going to have to do something that might not be popular, and how do you sit with that, and then how do you maybe let go of it, because it can be a burden?
I think I'll probably say exactly what other people say. It starts from a place of, why are you doing it? And why is it the right reason? So what is the integrity of the decision that you're making, I suppose, or the integrity in the decision you're making? I think the other thing is around actually the relationships you have and the reputation that you build. That actually, I hope most people who work with me and who know me know that I don't tend to be flippant. I tend to be quite considered, I suppose. And that when we make a decision, especially a hard one, it's being made for the right reasons. And I think if people can trust that you're the type of leader that is in line with the organization's values, that you're consistent and you show up consistently, that when those decisions are made, that you have to sit in that decision, and sometimes it's a not very nice one, but if you know that you've done it for the right reasons, you have to trust other people will know that. And even if they don't, or even if they don't believe that, as long as you're making it for the right reason, you have to be okay. I think that's your sense that I'm being really inarticulate here. When you're making the right decision for the right reasons, it doesn't matter if it's unpopular or not. It was the only decision to make, I suppose. And I guess I get more comfortable with that as the days go by. No one likes to be unpopular. I mean, that's like trauma from childhood, right? The kid in school. But I think as long as you're making it for the right reasons, I think that's all you can hope for. And you hope that other people see that too. I think it's lonely sometimes, and it's rubbish sometimes. But, it's a position of privilege, and so it outweighs the rest.
And I think this can be a sort of a transition in a sort of a leadership journey that doesn't often kind of get exposed as like an inflection point or a pivot, where, you might go into leadership or management and you have a team, and you're often, the way that that's approached is through quite a pastoral kind of performance. I need to check in with you. Are you okay? How's it going? I really care about you, 4 or 5 people. And it feels like a very human exchange. And then you become accountable for bigger functions and bigger outputs. And then it's like, what's right for the business? And you're much more having to manage on making decisions on the collective. And that does come from a different place, but often people don't recognise that you've had to go through that inflection point. And I think you're not inarticulate about it at all. I think for me, like, if you can sort of sit and feel peace with a decision, even if you can feel peace with something, even if it's difficult, if you know in your bones that it's made from a place of integrity, that you haven't been flippant or rushed in it, then you don't need to sort of self-flagellate for it forever. You have empathy for the people or the process or the product that it affects, but you don't have to wear the hair shirt.
I think also the other part of it is having great people who work with you. So I'm really lucky. I have a brilliant senior leadership team, and so when we're leading in the collective, and that it's not, I can't have the one-to-one conversations with everybody that it affects. Actually having people who are working closely with you, that you know that you have a synergy behind the decisions, that I think that also really helps, because I think, you know, you can't do it on your own. Like, you just can't. And it's not helpful to do it on your own either in reality. So I think that's the other part of the pie, I suppose, or puzzle.
And with others, so a big, I guess, journey that I've sort of been on around leadership is leading through others. So there becomes a point where actually it's not about you're not important. It's the sort of relationships or the coaching or the kind of the sort of leadership structures that you put in. I think it's fair to say that change is here now, right? So actually the sort of level of decision making that we're sort of having to do on a daily basis and being comfortable with change, like where are you at in terms of like managing change, ambiguity, uncertainty, and then how does that show up for your team as well?
I do, you know, enjoy stability and routines and things like that. But at work, that's not going to always fly at all. And so they told me to go read a book, Who Moved My Cheese, which was my first foray into kind of change management, being comfortable with change. And it was great feedback. Actually, it was their feedback. It was brilliant feedback. They gave me the feedback really well, and they gave me the tools to then say, well, how do I improve on it? But I think it's a constant, you know, I mean, there is a quote there, isn't it? The only constant is change or something, but it is the only constant in our lives in reality, if nothing else. And I think only recently I went to a talk with a gentleman called Sam Conniff around managing uncertainty and being comfortable and an expert in uncertainty, actually. And, you know, I think a lot about our sector, and I think a lot about how passionate people are in sort of the social impact space. And actually with that comes often a desire to make change and to be part of things. But I also think our sector is one that's quite uncertain as well. And you know, what I feel like is often a clash is around resilience. Actually, you know, do we have the resilience in ourselves, in our colleagues, in our team bases to be able to ride those uncertainties? And so for me, I guess thinking about change is being comfortable with it, embracing it, and thinking about what the tools you need to be okay with it are incredibly important. And as a leader, how do you equip and empower your teams so that they feel comfortable with that uncertainty as well? Because actually, otherwise, you are just in an uphill battle constantly.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we'll dig into uncertainty in a second. So we've shared a transformation journey where it was we're talking about challenges in the sector, we're talking about redesigning an organisation, you know, and how was that kind of change journey for you as someone in a leadership position who was kind of part of actually implementing that, executing it, and facing some of that stuff and fronting it up?
Yeah, so UNICEF went through quite a big change program back in 2021. So I was hot off a maternity leave, actually. So a few months after kind of returning, having had my little boy, and UNICEF was kind of in a position where it felt that, you know, uncertainty was ahead, and we needed to make sure that we were the most efficient and effective organisation kind of ready for that change. And so the context at that time was COVID was still very present in our lives. You know, this was barely a year after COVID, to be honest with you. So there were still lockdowns, or there was, you know, certainly still, you know, worlds where we weren't necessarily back in offices fully yet, and all those kind of things. And so the question was, okay, well, how do you do that? And how do you prepare people for that whilst actually the whole world has just changed for everybody in reality? So I think, you know, the work that we started was to say, well, what's the end goal we're looking to achieve here, and how might we do that? How do we take colleagues on a journey to deliver that? Who might we partner with to support us in that? But also with the kind of steady mindset of always focusing on the end result, because actually when change means people are having their jobs impacted, or, you know, they're going through consultation where they might lose their job, for example, like that is hard for people. Like that is really, really hard. And it's hard to lead through that because you feel guilty. Like that's a natural human, you know, emotion to feel guilty, and you're doing it for the right reasons. You know, it's for the business, but you still feel pretty crap about it, frankly. So I think it's also working with people who you can form relationships with who are going through it at the same time as well. So I also think I look back at that time and the colleagues I had, my teammates as well, and think, how we experienced that all together. I think that's kind of creates some unbreakable bonds a little bit as well. And I suspect for those who were on the other side, the same thing would be said, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. And so this idea of uncertainty and ambiguity being a constant. So Rebecca at Manifesto, this was something that you were sort of really kind of leading the charge on a couple of years ago, actually. So it was a similar sort of time, really thinking about, okay, well, if we're about to integrate some businesses and we're sort of clashing some human beings together, but we can't give certainty, okay, what can we do to kind of help people through this process? And so actually Sam Conniff was a big part of our journey as well.
Yeah, so I think a similar time that you were just undergoing your sort of the beginning of your sort of change chapter at that point, we worked really closely with Sam and we took the whole agency through his kind of uncertainty experts training. A really big shout out to him, because there was actually very little in the space about, well, like, uncertainty is one of the most uncomfortable human emotions that we can experience somatically, emotionally, on all sorts of levels, more than boredom, sometimes more than fear. And, for me, what really helped was, I was in a position where I would often kind of get unconsciously and with a certain amount of kind of, I think, sort of flattery or positivity, would sometimes sort of get cast in the role of the parent of Manifesto, or the mum. Sometimes it was Mamifesto or Mamifesto, and I was like, okay, I'm not your mum. There's like a zillion questions that I don't know the answer to, and I'm really ready to work through them with you. But I need you to take accountability for how you're showing up as your adult self in work, and when you understand what's happening to you when things are uncertain, then we can move through that much more quickly. I really loved, for me, the way that he broke it down into those different chapters, and this is why your brain goes offline. This is, these are the things that you can do. But was there anything in particular that really resonated for you?
Yeah, I think, before I answer that, I think your point around kind of people having responsibility to show up for and have accountability for their own self, I think is incredibly important, because I think it is really easy to defer to an organization or to your manager or to your, senior leadership team to have those answers. But we don't, and we shouldn't. We need to build an organization that has the right structures and processes in place and the right culture. But actually, it relies on people to show up and be accountable, and I think otherwise it does create a parent-child relationship, and I feel quite passionate about not that dynamic. I certainly only have room in my life for 2 kids, but also that's not what they need from us. It does them a disservice, I think, when that happens, because actually, they're not kind of recognizing their agency, I suppose, more than anything else. So that particular point I entirely agree with. And I think with Sam, being comfortable with that feeling of uncertainty, I think just the general ethos around it is what struck me, is that, he talked about an example about people being desperate for an answer, even if it's not the answer they want. They would still rather that than being in a place of uncertainty and uncomfortable in that. And I think I see that in myself, for sure. But, thinking about, when I went to this session with him, I was thinking about, okay, well, what is it the organization's role? What is it that we can do to equip our teams to feel more comfortable with it, to allow them to recognize when they're feeling uncomfortable and not necessarily to fix it? I think that's the other thing. It's a very natural thing to want to fix it for people, fix the situation, or if someone's unhappy, how do we fix it? But sometimes just to be okay with not being the fixer as well.
Yeah, and I think it's okay just to kind of create a space or a channel or a funnel so that people can lighten their cognitive load. And I've got this thing that I'm worried about, I've seen this thing. But you can, as a leader, and to be honest, it took me a long time to learn this. I definitely went into fix mode, looking at Lou, because I think Lou's done that one. But yeah, like together we have quite similar responses. And I think for me, my leadership journey really shifted when I started to recognise that I had to lead from a place of like really what Buddhists kind of call from the gap, so like, how am I showing up, what's going on for me, that's my stuff, this is my stuff, that's your stuff, together we look at stuff, but I'm not going to carry everything, and I have allowed myself to become, one of those really overloaded sort of donkeys. There are times where like, oh, I have left left the studio, left the office feeling
Weighed
that I'm
down.
carrying everyone else's, and I think everyone else has sort of trotted out, kind of gone, oh great,
I feel light as a
feel
feather.
better.
Thank you, Rebecca.
So let's just, like, it's about creating that space and say, okay, let's park that. Like none of us know, but like we don't need to sort of take it home and carry it in our system.
And I think, you'll fix it or listen. I think it reminds me of a conversation once I had with my husband where he would try and fix every problem I had. And I'm like, I don't need you to fix the situation. I kind of just need you to listen. And I think that's also our role as leaders, is that it's not our responsibility to fix it. It takes it away from them. Sometimes we do need to listen, and that's also our responsibility. We do need to listen, but then think about how we give them the tools or space or whatever they need within reason, except life, to be able to move forward.
I think it has got an element of sort of parenting in it because it works quite well with children. But one of the questions or set of questions has been really useful for me when things get a bit sort of like stressy in change, or someone's coming to you, is like, do you want me to listen? Do you want advice, or do you want me to take over? And just asking that question sometimes completely reframes how that person's feeling and what they think, because they know that there's an out, but also some people just process, and I'm one of them, process by talking. And there are a few people who manifesto like that. So it can feel often that the stress levels are sometimes a little bit higher than they are actually, but it's just that need to allow people the space to talk.
So Louise, or Lou, I interchange with both. So you can't come on this podcast and we not talk about open strategy, because we have forced you to come to Amsterdam, an international conference. Rebecca kind of escorted you through the airport with a delayed flight, almost missing our session. But actually, it's been a really great platform for a different kind of conversation in the sectors that we work in. So open strategy, and that, you describe it as it was a culmination of many things that led you to taking that approach. So it'd be great to, I guess, share with our listeners, like, actually what inspired you to take a slightly different approach to strategy development, and, what were the sort of learnings or surprises along the way?
Yeah, so I think the context back then, it feels like a long time ago, but the context back then is that we were out of COVID, so there had been a lot of change. We'd also had the restructure, and that had been as much as we tried very hard, most restructures are hard. Like, it was messy at times. People felt stung by it, and so we were kind of fresh out of a change program. Things had started to settle, and it was time to develop our new organisational strategy. We had two other contexts, and that is, I guess that's helpful to understand, is that strategy was a bit of a dirty word at UNICEF, to be honest with you. No one quite knew what it was. No one, it was never used particularly well. And we have an internal staff survey that talks about, lots of different things, and strategy being one of them, and it always gets the lowest score. And I'd always feel really sad as the director of strategy about that. But also the other side was we had a new chief executive join the organisation as well. So it felt like there was all these kind of, I wouldn't call them stars aligning, because some of them weren't great stars, but we had this rough context and in background. We'd gone through the change and restructure. That had been the right thing, but it'd been hard work. People felt, stung. The sector itself was having a tough time post-COVID, chief exec coming in. So I think where we got to was we wanted people to feel like they owned the strategy too. Strategy is not great when it's done and put in a drawer or not owned by the organisation. It's not a mandate from an executive team. And so we felt like the best thing we could do for the organisation is, okay, develop the best strategy we can do. That's obviously the objective. But actually, if we don't do it together and if we don't do it in the open, actually, we're not going to achieve what we could. And it just certainly this opportunity, I suppose, more than anything else. And so I guess that's where the conversation started.
Definitely. And I think kind of part of what really inspired me as sort of a sort of passing guest through the sort of strategy journey is kind of really being mindful of the change that was happening around you. And kind of, I know you and the strategy team kind of looked at hundreds of things that were going on in the world, and they were like, actually, do you know what? These are the biggest strategic drivers. So even taking the headspace and capacity to go, what's going on in the world? What might change in 3, 5, 5 years, 4 years, 10 years, it's such a long horizon point. And so, like, I guess, how did it feel to have the space to really invest in that sort of insight gathering, the analysis, to then kind of go, actually, folks, this is what we need to care about, and everything else, maybe not?
Yeah, and that was a really kind of like light bulb moment. Like we had, I was very lucky. I had a brilliant strategy team, great knowledge insight team. Like I had, and the teams around us were amazing. So I think again, like anything good, anything great, it's like with people, and having all the right people in the room. So, we had a great group of people working on the project or the strategy. And I think we did, so the team did and I say, by the way, it's the royal we, I did very little, but like the team did this amazing piece of insight, and it was over 200 pages of what's going on in the world that might affect UNICEF and might affect children in the world, and what does that look like. And then there was a huge amount of time doing exactly what you said, is kind of go, well, you can't have 200 pages. You can't design a strategy off 200 pages. You're going to have to choose the most important things. And so spending time across the organization, spending time, either as surveys or interviews or, focus groups or workshopping, mural sessions, to actually boil it down to say, what are the 10 most critical things that we need to design ourselves for, whether because they are opportunities that we want to leverage or actually strategic risks we need to respond to. And I think once we found those 10, everything else, whilst it wasn't easy, that would be unfair, it suddenly made much more sense to say, well, this is what you design against. And if you're not designing against it, your strategy isn't going to deliver for you at all. And so I would say our strategy isn't rocket science. You could look it up on the website. It's a really great piece of work, but it's not rocket science. And more than anything else, what was most important was embedding it across the organisation. And I think that's where the real, I guess, work was done and went really well.
Yeah, that co-design, the opportunities, but also I guess you're really open around kind of where this is an opportunity to contribute. Decisions are not being made here, and actually also that clarity, absolutely we want your inputs, but it's not appropriate for everyone to be involved in the decision making. And so we sort of talk about a concept of like consent over consensus. So like if we are looking for consensus with everyone, we will be paralyzed, we will never move over. However, at certain points we're going to say, do we have consent to move forward? We don't have consensus, but let's move forward. And so that's sort of a concept we've been trying to sort of, I guess, bring to life for organisations who are on their strategy journey and are navigating boards, youth advisory groups, kind of partners, service users. It's really difficult.
And that feels like a really nice, I guess, progression, I guess, from what we were using at the time, which was progress over perfection. That actually, it's never going to be perfect. Like we are not going to hold ourselves to perfection, like and accountable to perfection, because that's not actually good use of that time, and it's probably not going to move the dial in where we want to. But actually, just that one step forward each time is going to get us to where we want to be. So I totally agree.
I really like what you said about sort of removing the mystique from strategy, because I think as a leader in the making, it can feel sort of like this mysterious, like you were saying, like this mysterious portal to knowledge that I don't have, and this pressure to, I must write a strategy. And sometimes that comes from, pressure top down, trustees, boards. So like, well, like, what is your strategy? This idea that you've got this fixed place that you're going to end up, and this is exactly the way that you do it. But strategy, when it's unpacked, is really like, what is the next best set of actions that we need to take, and those actions are going to change over time. So I think the value, as well as sort of creating a culture of connection and what sounds like really amazing stakeholder management, those things are not easy to do. Very easy to put on a slide this is what you need to do, but actually very hard to do well, is that you're creating literacy with the things that your organisation really needs to care about, so people can start to use that as a lens for their decision making. It should drive autonomy. But I'm really struck by how we underwent a similar exercise in Manifesto, but walk our own talk. We did an open strategy kind of period at the beginning of the year. We're obviously a much smaller organisation, 100 people, but over 80% of the agency turned up to, to have a say and to engage, and the strategy is that much sort of richer for it. What I find sort of slightly astonishing that there are things on that strategy that are already out of date.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you're sort of feeling that sort of accelerated level of sort of change in your world as well.
Without a doubt, I think. But we've just actually, in the first quarter of this year, did a midterm strategy review to say, okay, well, this is the strategy we set up, and is it still relevant? What's been the progress on the elements were important? What are the things that are no longer important? And what, through updated insight might we want to kind of make sure we're focusing on? So out of that has come a set of new priorities, which, a large proportion are still the same. In some senses, so much has changed, but I also feel like sometimes nothing's changed either in reality. So I think lots of it still the same, but there are additional dynamics or perspectives. But yes, so it's a 4-year strategy, and after 2 years we did a midterm review, and I think that was helpful for us to refocus ourselves as well. And not dissimilar, it was done in a kind of open way, getting feedback, bringing stakeholders, talking to the organisation. But then exactly what you said, it's not decision-making forums, but to say, okay, we now have everything we need, this is where we're at, kind of thing.
Amazing. We could probably do an entire podcast on open strategy and co-design, but we actually have to wrap up and ask you 2 final questions.
2 final questions. Yeah. So these are questions that we're asking everybody in the hope that we can sort of crowdsource like some sort of like reference for people in who need something to hold on to in the moment. So what gives you energy when the work is hard?
The people I'm around. Like, I think, having relationships, having people who I can rely on and count on, whether they're in my organization or outside of it or my friendship group. It's like, I sound like a broken record, but it's my village. Like, I think, sometimes you need to get out of the echo chamber and kind of be around other people to support you. Like, we're all fallible. None of us are perfect, and we're also all human. So I think surrounding yourself with people who support you, lift you up, challenge you, I would say.
And sort of the idea of kind of progress over perfection, as leaders, it can be super challenging to sort of prioritize. Is that a mantra that comes naturally, or do you have to sort of remind yourself on a personal level?
No, I would say I am a work in progress perfectionist. I would say, if you were to kind of look at my earlier career, I wanted things to be absolutely perfect. I wanted things to look good, be good, have that validation from my boss, all those kind of things. But I think over time, I have realized that perfection doesn't need to look. Perfection, actually, if you redefine it, is what's perfect for right at that moment in time. And actually, often that means giving it 80% or doing it slightly differently, and because it's about what is the context, I suppose. So it is absolutely a mantra I subscribe to. I also think working in the open is something that we learned a lot from working with you guys, actually, in the work that we've done over many years, is being comfortable with sharing your work in progress. I just, again, as someone who would like people to see my final work because it's brilliant. A, that does a disservice to the input you could have got. B, you take a step back because you need to get feedback, and then you've wasted time. So I would say I really subscribe to it. I believe in it wholeheartedly. Not always brilliant at it.
Yeah, I think it's super important, not easy to do. I always say, if you want to sort of learn from people who are very comfortable with WIP, go and spend some time with designers, because you're putting your creative output out there to be critiqued. The client will have something in their head and you produce something that's not right, and that they do it with real sort of grace and
humility. I think so. You have to be vulnerable because you're saying, I know this isn't quite there yet, but I'm looking for your input at this moment in time. So I think that does require a level of confidence to be vulnerable, I think, as well, because no one wants to be told your work's rubbish, or that's never good.
Exactly. So what next for you? What next for UNICEF UK?
We've got a really exciting year. It's an ambitious one. We have high targets because right now it's a tough world to be a child in. Got a lot of kind of things to get over the line. So I think it's more about bedding in the new structure, kind of learning to live and work with that in a new way, collaborate more because of the new structure and changes, I think is a really big priority. Getting to know my team, them getting to know me, hopefully, and building my relationships across all of them, and being able to see their brilliance and work out kind of how we can bring that together more effectively. And I think having a summer holiday with my kids, actually.
Amazing. Thank you. That wraps that episode. Huge thank you to Louise Lane for joining us from UNICEF UK. It has been an amazing journey of The Juggle is Real, which is a theme that is coming up around and the many hats that leaders need to wear, really getting comfortable with the uncertain and maybe investing in some frameworks and thinking that can support your teams, and then really making the time for connection and the space. So huge thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for all that you do with us at Manifesto.
Nice pleasure. Great partners. Appreciate it.